This is more deadly. This is 5 per, this is 5% versus 1% and less than 1%, so this is deadly stuff.
We show cases, 99% of which are totally harmless.
Not just older.
Yeah, exactly.
Young people, to plenty of young people.
Young people are almost immune to this disease.
It's also more deadly than your strenuous flus.
We lose thousands and thousands of people a year to the flu. We don't turn the country off.
I wanted to always play it down. I still like playing it down.
Everybody, welcome to Stir Crazy, episode 87. They're both complicit. I'm your host, Kim Brown, also known as Miss Cleo, also known as Miss Seeley. Listen, what we just heard there was an interesting ad put together by the Lincoln Project. The Lincoln Project notwithstanding. What we heard there within, the big story that's been percolating over the news cycle the past day and a half, so to speak, is these bombshell tapes released by journalist Bob Woodward. Bob Woodward of Woodward and Bernstein, Deep Throat, taking down the Nixon administration fame, and Bob Woodward has fucked the pooch in the wrong way. In case you don't know, Bob Woodward had been interviewing Donald Trump over a series of weeks and months since the outbreak of the coronavirus pandemic, and contained within that Lincoln Project ad that we just heard are the excerpts from some of the tapes and recordings that Bob Woodward made of the president downplaying coronavirus, at the same time acknowledging how deadly the virus was. And here we are approaching 200,000 deaths in the United States from coronavirus, almost 6.5 million infections of this virus. The whole of the United States economy and basically daily way of life upended and turned upside down. Trump knew it was serious, and Bob Woodward knew that Trump knew it was serious, but Bob Woodward said, nah, I'm gonna hold this until my book is ready to publish. This is a travesty of our profession of journalism. Very disappointing that it came from someone who is a known president slayer, so to speak, Bob Woodward. You guys, we got a lot to talk about today. We're going to get into some other ways that coronavirus has definitely impacted the country. We are looking at so many infections behind bars with a lot of people who are incarcerated. The virus is raging unchecked in a lot of the nation's prisons, with people who are locked up bearing the brunt of this. And a lot of times being left to die, not being able to social distance or wash their hands or take the necessary steps in order to try to protect themselves from COVID-19. We're also seeing, as schools reopen in certain places, in South Carolina, the first teacher has died from coronavirus, only 28 years old, and they taught elementary school. So are we going to be seeing more of this? And why did Bob Woodward not open his mouth before it was time for his book to be published? Ultimate failure. Well, listen, we're not going to bojangle any further. Wait, hello to everybody that's watching us, by the way. Hello, if you're in the chat and in the comments, we want to hear from you. Hey, Periscope, what's going on? What's up to Twitter? Black Twitter, white Twitter, native Twitter, conservative Twitter, liberal Twitter, lefty Twitter, everybody that's watching us right now on that app. Let me introduce our panel real quick, everybody. Of course, you know these two gentlemen. If you watch The Real News and if you watch Stir Crazy, you know who we're talking to today. First of all, give it up for, we call him Mr. Thursday around here. He's also our visuals and research producer. His name is Andrew Corkery. He's from the state of New Jersey. He's holding it down. Also, from South Baltimore, by way of Howard County, Maryland. And also the host of the show here on The Real News, Why You Should Give a Fuck, Tunde Ogunfolaju. Gentlemen, so lovely to see your contrasting faces on my screen today. Guys, we're not going to bojangle any further. I want to get right into this because clearly we know that Trump has fucked up COVID and handling of the COVID, right? Black and brown people have been dying from this pandemic and from this virus by the tens of thousands. But we knew that. But the fact that a journalist knew, I think this recording was made either in January or February that Bob Woodward did. That Bob Woodward knew that Trump knew how deadly this was, despite publicly downplaying the virus, ranging from calling it a hoax to a version of the flu to saying that young people were practically immune, all bullshit, right? Bob Woodward knew this and did not bother to report upon it until several months later. Tunde, I'm going to start with you because, you know, the title of today's show is They're Both Complicit. Does Bob Woodward actually have some ownership over how badly this was handled, given the magnitude of the information that he was sitting on and just refused to publish or broadcast it for now several months?
Yeah. First off, thank you for having me on. It's always great to come back to Stir Crazy. And you know, to kind of start things off, yes and no. He does deserve some of the blame, you know, for things that have happened, but also not really. And that might not be a popular opinion, I guess, in certain circles. But the reason why I say that is because, for one, yes, he does to some large extent. You know, he's kind of a piece of shit for not releasing this earlier, especially when he knew everything that was going on, and chose not to say anything, you know, and chose to hold it for his book. He chose to, I don't know if it was money or the fame of it all that he was chasing, but he certainly could have released this information a lot sooner, and that may have helped the public sort of realize that Trump was kind of full of shit from the start. But that's kind of why I don't know if he does, you know, deserve the full sort of wrath of everyone in America, because, you know, it's an indictment, I think, on us when, if he had released this in, you know, whether March, April, whenever it was, right? There's a very strong chance that 3 days later, we would not be talking about it. We would not be talking about that news, that it would have been released, it would have been talked about, and it would have been promptly forgotten. There's a very specific moment in Trump's, and he's done like a lot of shit. So, you know, obviously I'm ashamed that it took me to this point to get to where I've arrived at. But it took when Trump retweeted, it was the guy saying it was like an old folks place or whatever it was, and the guy you know, was yelling like white power, and then that story happened, and there was no, you know, there was no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There was no two ways about it. He retweeted it. It happened, and then we haven't talked about it since. The sitting president of the United States retweeted a video of a guy saying white power, and we all just moved on from it. So whether or not this, you know, this you know, clip of Trump talking about the virus, whether or not it would have come out, you know, back then, and, you know, and maybe even now, it might be even more effective now that the election is right around the corner. And it's a gruesome thought, you know, to think, because people have literally died, you know, obviously because of the virus. We're close to 200,000 people that have died from the coronavirus or coronavirus related complications. You know, so it's a gruesome thought, but also it's the reality of the world we live in, that, you know, even if this would have come out, who knows how long it would have actually stuck. And Trump is somehow able to create whatever reality he wants to create. Yeah,
that's a very valid point, Tunde. I mean, Trump is such a constant shit poster, even if it's ranging from his actual Twitter feed to stuff that he literally lets come out of his mouth. Dwayne, pop up Lisa's tweet, if you could, because, you know, Andrew, I feel as though people who work in news, people who work in media, journalists, like, we're kind of taking this personally from Bob Woodward. Our managing editor here at The Real News, Lisa Snowden-McCrae, she says, what a failure of journalism, under Josh Holland's tweet about how Bob Woodward's been sitting on this information for 5 months, this tape, no less. And, Andrew, this is not the first time that Donald Trump has been caught on tape saying incendiary things that would lead everybody to believe that he is definitely way over his head when it comes to running the United States, which I think most reasonable people knew when he announced his candidacy for president back in 2015. But why is this a failure of journalism on the part of Bob Woodward? Bob Woodward did not serve the public interest by sitting on this information.
No, he didn't. Obviously, I mean, like, when you sit on this kind of magnitude of information for that amount of time with a president that's as gaslighting happy as Donald Trump, that's clearly a problem. But I think the larger issue gets to what Tunde was saying, which was, the media's priorities and how they categorize and how they value different things that Trump has to say and how they scrutinize those things in a particular manner and move on from them once he says something else, so he can retweet white supremacists and the media simply just moves on to whatever the next story of irrationality and ridiculousness that Donald Trump wants to move on to, and doesn't spend the time critiquing how he actually uses the media in order to personify and articulate and get his message forward in an uncritical way. I mean, they just look at themselves as like, not part of this system that they're apparently supposed to be critiquing or writing articles about or what have you, when in reality, they're part and parcel of how Donald Trump and his administration and the reality we're currently now in has been created. They gave Trump all this airtime, when he was running in 2016. They uncritically ran a lot of his rallies for hours on end. And they're now just starting to come to the realization that some of that, editorialization and some of that lack of editorialization really was problematic. And so you're seeing that borne out in Woodward. But I just got one thing to say about him sitting on that, which is just capitalism. I mean, clearly the man's trying to make a buck. He's trying to, sell his book. And obviously this is going to get people to recognize his name again and to thrust his name back into the spotlight, in addition to the fact that he has this book out. So, clearly he was looking out for his own interests that were incentivized by the capitalist system that we live in, and not looking out for the interests of journalism when he sat on this. But he also realized, too, what Tunde was saying, that people would have moved on from this rather quickly back in April and, in March and May and what have you, because there was so much going on at that particular time, and Trump would have gaslit it and just moved on.
Correct. We have a lot of people in the comments putting their foot up Bob Woodward's ass, basically. Occupy New Paradigm. Fuck Bob Woodward. What a scumbag. Can't believe he sat on that while 190,000 people died. Also from the comments, we've got Guy Shaw. So much for duty to warn. Thanks, Bob. Andrew, I'm so appreciative that you brought up the fact how a lot of specifically like cable news networks, not just Fox, but definitely CNN, definitely MSNBC, were covering Trump's rallies when he was initially running for president. Like you said, uncritically, without commercial interruption. And even prior to then, we've talked about this here on Stir Crazy, how the mainstream media basically enabled Trump by making him or giving him a lot of political credibility simply by consistently airing his bullshit, especially beginning during the Obama administration when he was doing this birther stuff and holding press conferences where CNN would stop their programming. Let's go to Donald Trump from Hawaii. Let's hear what his private investigator has to say about Barack Obama's birth certificate. And a lot of this empowered him and gave him legitimacy in the eyes of those who did not see Donald Trump for the charlatan that he clearly is. So why is the media so fucking late to the Trump is racist, Trump is dangerous, Trump is a fascist party here? I mean, we have entered a whole new scene. Like this season of 2020, what episode are we in now? Episode 9, September. Oh my gosh, this shit is crazy. The whole season's been nuts. But The media.
This real life action of Black Mirror is really getting ridiculous at this point.
Right. Season 6 of Black Mirror has been crazy. And who knew that they were going to make it live action so all of us could experience Black Mirror in real time. But why is it that the mainstream outlets, particularly, and I'm going to throw Bob Woodward in there. Bob Woodward is a MSNBC regular. Used to write for the Washington Post, now owned by Jeff Bezos and Amazon. I mean, he's a corporate journalist for all intents and purposes. And it seems as though that he is also still, in part, like the rest of the mainstream outlets, still representing the interests of the elite and not disseminating information and not being critical of the president, his policies, his staff, his cabinet, for doing things that are ultimately harmful to the greater part of America.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, I mean, I think that's a really, really, really easy, question and answer, right? Like, because it won't suit them at the end of the day. We try to act like Trump is somehow this sort of anomaly, right? That Trump's a one-off. The truth is he's not. The reason why Woodward, as well as the rest of the mainstream media, why they're late to the party, is because it's their party, right? That it's not as if the people who are surrounding Trump are anybody new to them. Trump's just surrounding himself with people that they already know. It's the same old shit, It's not anything different. Trump himself, might be a different sort of what do you call it, like a vessel or different sort of talking piece for for sort of the mainstream sort of GOP as they are now. But it's when you look at the policies, when you look at the people who tend to run in the same circles. When this Woodward news came out, one of the first things I remembered was when Bolton put out his book, months ago, and it was a big to do about his book. But then, if you stop and think for a moment, this is like, well, how many administrations has Bolton been a part of? Like it's just a recycling of the same shit, and so it won't suit them to change anything, because the truth is the only reason why they actually have like a significant problem with Trump is because Trump shits all over them. That's it. That's the only reason, is because he dares to offend them, and that's the only reason why they even try now to say like, oh, like, yeah, maybe he is racist. I don't know.
Maybe. What? How could it be racist? He's friends with Omarosa. Like, I mean, Herman Cain was his boy.
Yeah.
Ridiculous. Guys, I want us to talk about really the impact that coronavirus has had, COVID-19 has had on this country. I mean, really, it has completely reshaped every aspect of American life, from the start of the school semester this year. Kids are learning at home, distance learning. Colleges are having to make adjustments. You have to wear a mask everywhere. I hope people are wearing a mask everywhere. A lot of y'all ain't wearing masks, and I see y'all dirty asses, and y'all keep y'all distance, because I'm very much scared of the Rona. So please put your mask on, wash your hands, for God's sake. But some portions of our populations are being way more impacted by this in a deadly way, and probably the most vulnerable, in addition to people who are in nursing homes and nursing care facilities, are those who are locked up, people who are in prisons, people who are incarcerated, people in some cases who are just being held without bail, not even necessarily sentenced for a crime. They are there because they literally cannot afford the bail to get out of jail. So now they are being placed in confined conditions, unsanitary conditions, conditions that are ripe for catching COVID-19. Andrew, I know you have been looking into this, and shout out to Rattling the Bars as well. Eddie Conway and Eric Blunt, they have been doing extensive coverage of prisoners dealing with COVID, being left to die, basically. It's almost like COVID has attacked the people or the demographics in America that Donald Trump and his ilk give no fucks about, starting off with prisoners. Andrew, talk to us about what's happening behind bars.
Yeah, so just for example, in July and August of this year, they have been the two worst months of the pandemic for prisoners and emotionally taxing for loved ones who have their loved ones in prison. So more than 6,000 prisoners were infected each week for 6 weeks running during those months, leading up to the last week in August, the longest stretch of which, had the highest cases of coronavirus. So we're talking about 6,000, and that's what we know about at this point. So over the course of the pandemic, nearly 1,000 prisoners have died of COVID-19, and more than 108,000 have been sickened, according to the Marshall Project, which tracks this information. And the U.S. relies disproportionately on these prisons and jails to administer criminal justice. And it's responsible, the U.S., as we know, people who watch the real news and watch Rattling the Bars know, we have a quarter of the world's incarcerated population in America. So in 2018, 10 million people were arrested, 5 million people went to jail, and 2 million were otherwise incarcerated, such as in a prison. And this problem is just exacerbating because of COVID-19. And governors like, the state of Maryland, Larry Hogan, who are not doing enough to get people out of prison, are in effect sentencing people to death. And this is very indicative of the value set of America, in that problem goes away once you go to prison. The American populace is trained to think that all these people deserve to be there, when in actuality, a lot of these people took plea deals for things that they didn't even commit sometimes, and they're in there through no fault of their own and or are wrongfully convicted. So we need to break down that ideological framework from which Americans view prisoners and view the prison industrial complex as a place of getting people who don't belong in our society out of society, when in reality, the numbers and the data show that that's not true, regardless of whatever you think of the humanity.
Tunde, I follow a prominent abolitionist on Twitter. Her name is Miriam Kaba, at Prison Culture. She's brilliant. She has her account locked right now. So if you already don't follow her, you may not be able to follow her for a while because she deals with a lot of harassment online and trolls bothering her and whatnot. But anyway, if you do follow her, then you know the depth of the well of wisdom that she shares about what's happening with people behind bars. And one of her main complaints has to do, or criticism rather, goes directly at New York State Governor Andrew Cuomo, because as Andrew pointed out, governors have the ability to commute sentences, and they have done a shitty job of commutations since the onset of this pandemic. And since it was made clear that prisoners are the ones that are contracting COVID at ridiculously high rates, even dying from the virus. Why are these governors terrible? Which is an odd question to ask, but it sort of goes back to the clarion call right now that's in the streets to abolish police and defund the police, and that extends to abolishing prisons as well, because they are inhumane places for people to be, and for them to be warehoused away from society, and especially now during a pandemic, basically to be left in squalid conditions that could endanger their lives. And that's not what they were sentenced. They weren't sentenced to death. They were sentenced to a time behind bars, and people don't deserve the fate that they're getting right now.
Yeah, to the people sort of, in charge, whether it be governors or whoever else, to them it's like, well, what's the difference? That's really no skin off my back if they die. They went to jail. They shouldn't have went to jail. That, you keep seeing these sort of like memes online of people saying, well, it's funny how the police leave you alone when you don't, when you follow the laws, but obviously that doesn't take into account, well, for one, what are the laws? And then two, who's actually making them, and then, further to that, some of these people aren't even, they haven't even been convicted of anything yet, right? As Andrew was saying, that some of them are still, waiting, they're just, being held. And through that, they're, have the potential, have the risk of contracting the virus and potentially dying, and, this kind of relates to the story that we were just talking about in terms of this idea of, the sort of faux. So you have Andrew Cuomo in New York, who, for all intent and purposes, is sort of in this whole coronavirus era has been sort of the juxtaposition to Donald Trump, right? That where Trump just seems erratic and crazy. Andrew Cuomo, at least it's portrayed by the mainstream media as being sort of the steady hand, the leadership we need. But then when you just peel back the layers even just a little bit, and you look at things like these, it's clearly uncovered that at the end of the day, it's the same shit. He doesn't give a fuck about the people behind bars, right? Because they're behind bars, so they don't matter anymore. Their lives mean nothing anymore, simply because they're behind bars. So this is nothing that's different than what we typically get. And I think one thing that has to be done is we have to start or to continue, I guess, to change the narrative when it comes to who our champions are, right? That, when the mainstream media tries to force certain people as champions, we have to tear them down as that, because they certainly aren't that, right? So Kim, when you say, why these governors are fucking up when it comes to these things, it's because they're playing politics, right? They don't want to upset the people in suburbia, if they start, sort of commuting some of these sentences, right? Because then people in suburbia are going to start to get a little nervous, right? Like, oh my gosh, we can't let these people out. Who knows what will happen if they get let out? We don't want to be murdered. Whether or not the people that they're that are going to be released. It doesn't even matter to them what they did, right? It's just that the fact that they're behind bars, and so they're putting politics over lives, which is it's clearly it's disappointing. It's savagery, and it should be pointed out, and it should be brought out into the daylight instead of just swept under the rug, as things like this typically get. Is what typically happens with them. They just is back page news to everyone.
Absolutely. And listen, if you know anyone that is incarcerated right now, please do what you can to support them as best as you can from the outside, whether it means putting money on their books, writing them, sending them letters, sending them books. Do something, because the people who are suffering, the men and women, let me please stress that women are struggling and suffering under COVID, incarcerated as much, if not more, than the men as well. Unfortunately, we don't talk enough about women behind bars, but try to support your folks as best you can. And I'm going to take my own advice. This guy I grew up with, actually, on the same street as me, I found out a couple of years ago he was locked up for murder. And I'm not enthusiastic about him being locked up for murder, but at the same time, he is still a person. He is alive. He is a human. And I don't think that he deserves to die or suffer from coronavirus, regardless of whatever he was convicted of. So I'm going to take my own advice on that one and reach out and see what I can do for him. He's locked up in Jessup, by the way. I want us to move on, but not move on. We're going to stay with COVID, because another group that America has made very clear that they could care less about, two groups actually, in regards to exposing potentially to this deadly virus, are teachers and kids. Now, if you thought America cared about kids, you were wrong. And we have seen enough mass school shootings in the United States to understand that this country, does not truly care about the fate, the well-being, physical, mental, or emotional well-being of children, and by extension, teachers. There was a story coming out of South Carolina where just a couple of weeks after the reopening of schools there, tragically, a 28-year-old teacher has died as a result of coronavirus, the first teacher in the state to have passed away. 2 weeks. Okay, she was only in her classroom less than 2 weeks ago. According to the Associated Press, her name was Demetria Bannister, 28 years old. I'm going to say that again, 28 years old. Okay, the Associated Press is reporting that Ms. Bannister was diagnosed with the virus on a Friday and she died on a Monday. Now, she had not been doing in-person instruction, but prior to the week before school began, she was at the school for, they have in-person teacher days or whatever. So she was there, not certain whether or not that's where she contracted the virus, but she did begin teaching from home. And only 2 weeks after the start of the school year there in South Carolina, we've seen a teacher pass away, and she taught 3rd grade. So guys, I'm so, disheartened by this information, because I feel as though this is just the beginning of what could be an ongoing situation. Now, we know a lot of places are doing distance learning. Some places aren't. Not everywhere is. And tragically, throughout this school year, for both school-age children and even college students, we are going to experience students dying. We're going to experience teachers and professors dying. We're going to experience members of the faculty, the custodial staff, cafeteria people, security people, people who are essential workers working on these educational campuses. And they're going to end up passing away before this year is over from this virus. The lack of preparation and I think thought that went into reopening schools, either virtually or in person, just is not making the grade in my opinion. But I wanted to get y'all's take on that. Teachers are going to be bearing the brunt of this, Andrew. I mean, what are your thoughts about how some teachers have definitely stood up? I'm thinking about the teachers union in Florida, also the teachers union in Chicago, that have been very adamant, even in some cases going to court to say that, no, we are not prepared for in-person learning. And if we do, we're going to see a lot of people in our profession pass away.
Yeah, I mean, I think places like Florida, obviously places like Texas, there's really no data-driven case that you can make to bringing people back to an enclosed environment where you have to teach children and then they're coming in and out of that situation every single day. I mean, there are some states inside the country with very low numbers where you can possibly begin to make a case to say that kids should come back for a limited amount of time with a limited number of kids with full PPE and full access to resources and so forth. Like, for example, I'm in Vermont right now, and Vermont has the lowest COVID cases in the entire continental United States. So, I mean, I think to open some schools up here with PPE with limited amount of students and teachers would make some sense. But for a state like Maryland to do it when they've been yin-yanging the whole time, going back and forth from spike to drop to spike to drop, and they're now, 600 to 800 cases, a day or so, depending on what numbers you're looking at and when that is, it doesn't make any sense to open up a school in that type of environment. So I think that the federal government and the state governments are doing a lousy job of delineating what risks are able to be taken and what risks are necessary, and which states are not able to reopen at all, given the fluctuation in numbers that they're having as it relates to COVID. So I think that it's a little bit complicated, but at the same time, if you can do remote learning, it's really not worth any risk of going back to school and risking people's lives in this situation when we're trying to develop a vaccine and we're trying to, quote unquote, get back to normal. But at the same time, we have to look at how these governments prepared for the situation. They prepared for the situation by not trying to get PPE, by not trying to think about all the ways in which people come in contact with one another, like we're seeing in South Carolina and so forth. They prepared for it by trying to remove all of the liability on these institutions legally. So, for example, in schools, they're trying to make it so that the schools aren't liable for the spread of COVID before these kids go back to school. And so that was the main priority, is making sure that there wasn't any liability, not dealing with the problem itself and dealing with the astronomical increase in COVID cases in a number of different states that are now reopening schools. The problem was removing the liability, so the schools and institutions, and also with private industries in work environments in these states, that they don't have to face legal and criminal liability for facing, for dealing with this virus in a terrible way and putting people's lives at risk every single day.
Tunde, a lot of people before the start of the school year, formal beginning of the school year, we're seeing how teachers were stepping up and speaking out about potentially being placed in risky conditions, being in the front of a classroom, dealing with a bunch of germy little children, right? Scary stuff. Even stories that we saw about teachers revising their wills, creating advanced directives, how they would want to be medicated or intubated should they contract COVID-19 and become sick. But a lot of people were hoping that the teachers were kind of going to lead the way in a general labor strike, a nationwide strike, because if the teachers walked out of school and said, no, we're not doing this, it would be a beacon for people of other industries to also walk out and say that, no, our lives are worth more than this, and we deserve to either be compensated accordingly, or we need to be protected accordingly in a way that keeps us as safe as possible. Could we still possibly see the teachers lead the way, either college teachers, public school teachers, be the catalyst for bigger actions when it comes to Americans taking up and going out into the streets in even greater numbers to demand that this country, either the government and corporations, et cetera, businesses, do what needs to be done in order to make sure that people can survive this pandemic?
Yeah, there's always the possibility, right, of teachers banding together and going on a nationwide strike. But we have very short memories, right? Because before COVID happened, what were teachers in the streets protesting? Well, more pay, better benefits, better conditions overall. And so you take that and then you combine that with COVID in terms of just the economic situation that everybody finds themselves in now. And I don't know, that's a tough ask, man, of anybody. And obviously, it's in these times of sort of peril that things are like that are needed, but also that's a lot of burden. But, I guess first and foremost, fuck the government for putting them in that position in the first place, to having to make those type of choices. But if we're to remember, if we really want to dig deep about or sort of dig into how the government, at least in its current incarnation, how they feel about teachers and schools and anything like that. Well, we need look no further than a lot of the mass shootings that happen, right? Because what was the ultimate response from that? That these mass shootings happen in schools, what it felt like was like weekly, and the response was, oh well, hey, let's just give teachers guns. That was essentially the response, from obviously from Trump, but then it weirdly enough, it was getting some kind of traction, right? And so I know a lot of these decisions about schools, they get done on local levels. But when you see that total picture, the total picture of things like that, it's not a mystery in terms of where we're at. Obviously, the conversation now turns to what's to be done. And the truth is, I know that there are experts that come through Stir Crazy all the time. I am not one, and I'm not going to try to pretend to be one. I don't know. I don't know what the correct way to go with that is. Would a nationwide strike absolutely, capture some attention and at least elicit some sort of change? Absolutely. But what would that do for the teachers who are already making, no money in these times of COVID as well? I don't know. I don't know what the correct response for that is.
Oh, but you're so close, Tunde, because all of this stuff is related, right? When it comes to defunding the police, defund the fucking police and pay the teachers.
Yeah.
Problem solved. You know what I mean? Like, yes, this
add the Pentagon in there too, and then you'll really have some money.
So, if we just, all of the waste, that literally hundreds of billions of dollars that the Pentagon and the military waste annually could fund so much social programs in this country. But America's not interested in that. They're interested in maintaining this master-slave relationship with the working class of this country. So, yeah. But Andrew, even those who find themselves in a somewhat privileged position in America are still dealing with the bullshit of capitalism and how it has really made recovering from COVID-19, either economically or even on a personal health level, almost impossible. How has capitalism really hamstrung the COVID-19 recovery?
Yeah, so I'll just give you one example. There's this really good article in ProPublica which talked about how a doctor went to his own employer for a COVID-19 antibody test, and it cost $10,984. So I'm going to say that again. This physician's premier ER in Austin, Texas, charged Zachary Sussman's insurance $10,984 for a COVID antibody test, even though Sussman worked for the chain and knows the testing materials only cost about $8. Now, even more surprising than this is basically the insurance company paid in full. You know, the freestanding emergency room charged his insurance company once again an outstanding $10,984 for the visit and got paid every penny with absolutely zero pushback. You know, the bill left him so dismayed that he quit his job. And now, after ProPublica's questions, the parent company of the insurer said the case is being investigated and could, you know, lead to repayment or referral to a legal enforcement. But this gets to the heart of the capitalization and the neoliberalization of the hospital infrastructure that we have here in America. So about a month later, after he received this visit, this visit only took about 30 minutes, the company that is his insurer, which is called Goldman Rule, sent Sussman his explanation of benefits for the physician's portion of the bill. That came to about $2,100. That was for the physician that gave the test to this individual, and that was $2,100. And he wasn't surprised by this because he knew the extent to which his employer, Physicians Premier, had a high dollar business model in which the convenience of standing free ER was substituted in at a cost to basically everyone. So ProPublica has done some really good detailed work about how this is going on in Texas. And there's another case outside of Austin where there was a $175 COVID test that was given a charge of about $2,479 at a number of different freestanding ER hospitals in Texas. So this is just one of the ways in which people are trying to profiteer, not even on really the working class or the poor, but also the professional class of this country. And I wonder, you know, to what end and to what point those people in the more professional to middle class will begin to show solidarity with people in the working class and the poor because of the fact that they're being hit over the head with these enormous COVID bills left and right. I mean, this case in ProPublica is not the only incident of this. There's been a number of different cases in Texas and around the country. So COVID-19 is inherently, you know, exacerbated by our capitalist society that seeks to make as much profit as humanly imaginable off of a situation where people have virtually no options whatsoever.
And it's incredible to even think that we are in an election year and healthcare is not even really on the ballot, right? Because I hear what you just said there, Andrew, because the COVID antibody test cost $8. The insurance was billed over $10,000. Well, they took the difference and sent that money to Joe Biden's campaign. Like, look, Joe Biden, we need you to definitely keep the public option off of your platform because Medicare for all, universal health care is not beneficiary to the bottom line of private healthcare industry. I mean, Tunde, for God's sakes, we're in a fucking pandemic. We have almost 200,000 people who have died from this in not even 12 months. And neither presidential candidate, really, even coming from the Congress, which just resumed their congressional session after having the audacity to take a fucking vacation during this shit. No one's even talking about healthcare. No one's even discussing plans about how people are going to deal not only with the skyrocketing costs of treating COVID and its after effects, because for God's sakes, we know that should you even survive COVID, a number of people, they're calling them long haulers, are still dealing with residual effects from the disease, from the virus, including ongoing fevers, problems with their heart, kidneys, brain, lungs, stuff that we don't know indeterminately how long they're going to be dealing with this. And yet, as we are in election year, no one's even talking about it, at least from a political perspective, from those who seek to be our leaders.
Yeah, well, I would say that it's well planned, and what I mean by that is that they've conditioned us to think this way, and I don't want to let the cat out of the bag. Is that the saying? I guess that might be the thing. I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too early, but one of the things that we're working on for season 2 of Why You Should Give a Fuck is the idea of the psychology of why, with certain things, like whether it's you're talking about Medicare for all, whether you're talking about college for all, whether you're talking about some of these things that they just automatically tell you are radical ideas, why we just accept them as quote unquote radical ideas, right? If there's anything that should highlight the absurdity that is our medical system, and also the craziness that is the pharmaceutical system, it's exactly this time, right? If there's anything that should alert the entire America of how crazy our system is, when you're getting for a test or for for these sort of smaller things, you're getting these bills for like tens of thousands of dollars. It should be we should be awakened to now that this is crazy. But the reason why the candidates don't bring it up is because they don't have to, right? The one candidate who was going hard for Medicare for all, obviously Bernie Sanders, the primary process essentially edged him out, and obviously there's a lot that goes into that. But as soon as he sort of went away, they don't have to talk about it anymore. You know why? Because they don't have to, because apparently, America as a whole, and I mean us as voters, aren't demanding that they talk about it. One of the reasons why I hate watching any sort of like speeches, that are given, or is because it's all just bullshit. It's all just word salad and buzzwords to make you feel comfortable. But really, at the end of the day, they're not saying shit. They're not proposing anything that's new. In terms of watching Biden as he gives certain speeches and things like that. And so, until we demand of the candidates that, no, this is not going to be something you're just going to push off until later, this is not going to be something that isn't brought to the forefront, then they're just not going to, right? They're not going to talk about it if they don't feel like it's imperative, unless they're pushed to, unless in a very aggressive way, unless they know that it's something that if they don't talk about, then there's a good chance that they're not going to win.
This is what's so frustrating about Biden, too, is that he's constantly fixated on this small core group of like moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats who obviously see Medicare for all as a threat to the current worldview of this nation and our society. So, I mean, it's obvious why he doesn't want to talk about this, because the political constituency that he's chosen, not even the one that would actually give him support if he were to come out and give some like thrustful support towards these like really good policies that other people in the campaign were running for, like Bernie Sanders, there's plenty of more people on the left who would be willing to organize. That's the part of the Democratic base that's so incredibly energized at this moment in time. If you look at what's happening out on the streets with the Black Lives Matter protests and all the intersecting political changes and all the intersecting political topics that are related to Black Lives Matter and the movement, such as Medicare for all, that movement would get behind, Joe Biden if he, for all of his flaws, and we know there are many, it would get behind him more if he actually came out forcefully for programs like this that the left has been talking about for ages. But he refuses to do that because he's doubling down on the same political calculus that Hillary Clinton made in 2016, which is that she can win over more white suburban moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats. And for every one of those people that he gains, he's going to lose 3 or 4 progressive people that are out in the streets that are willing and energized to vote and come out for this election because they don't want to see Donald Trump win.
That's always befuddling me. And now here we are, 2 presidential election cycles, and we've seen the Democrats stick to the same script where they are trying to actively either recruit or claw back centrist, moderates, Trump voters who were former Obama voters, and they don't want to grow their tent from the left. Like, they are determined to like give radicals, so-called radicals or leftists, like the stiff arm, like, no, your policies are too much. And another example of this is the Green New Deal, right? Where we've seen the progressive part of the party who are in Congress, get behind this and author it and make these, I guess, big demands upon industry, but they are necessary because the planet is fucked. And a perfect example of that is what we've been seeing in the Bay Area. Dwayne, I want to see that video from the Bay Area where, the sky is the wrong color. It's not blue. It's orange and it's red, and it is a glow from the wildfires that are raging really up the entire whole of the West Coast. Look at San Francisco, guys. Look at Oakland. Look at the Bay Area. That looks like Mars. You want to go to Mars? No, baby, we're going to bring Mars to you right here on this planet. The Bay Bridge just bathed in orange and gold. And it's not pretty because, my God, the air quality there of what residents must be breathing in is horrible. Amidst a pandemic that is attacking people's lungs, this cannot be good. And we know that for a very long time that communities of color, the marginalized communities, have been bearing the brunt of environmental racism. And, this is what happens time and time again when you ignore the way that oppressed communities are neglected and treated. What happens is those same problems come to affect the whole of the population. If it's okay for the Blacks and the Browns to live in substandard conditions in proximity where they're near refineries and incinerators and their air quality is bad and their rates of asthma are terrible, oh, well, we'll just ignore that. Well, you can't ignore this when one of the most richest places in this country is now experiencing terrible air quality and the surrounding areas are aflame. Why isn't the environment on the fucking ballot, guys? I don't even know who to start with. Tunde, I think it's your turn. Let's go with you. No one's even talking about the Green New Deal. Not even Joe Biden. He's not interested in the Green New Deal. And I saw a tweet that went viral yesterday that had a similar picture of the Bay Area with the orange sky, and it was quoting Nancy Pelosi. And it said, it's about the Green New Dream or whatever they want to call it. When AOC and Senator Ed Markey had announced the New Deal, and Senator Nancy Pelosi and other establishment Democrats were somewhat dismissive of it. The time is now for some environmental changes coming from the federal and congressional level, and yet, nope. Joe Biden is not here for it. What are your thoughts, Tunde?
Yeah, and this is kind of a roundabout story, but so my girlfriend was talking to me about I was riding her bike, and I had the tire had popped or something like that, and the back tire was flat, but I didn't even notice that the tire was flat, and she made a joke that, oh, well, you're so used to things like just not being perfect that you just didn't even notice that was happening. And I'm reminded of that when I, look at images like this, that we see, the skies, orange, and, we just learn to accept it, right? We just learn to be like, yeah, I guess that's what it is now. That's what happens, right? There are those that are extremely vocal about this, right? Those who are, advocates of the Green New Deal, who, like the Sunrise Movement, who make it their job to advocate for change. But, the reason why, in terms of the candidates, not, they don't even talk about these things. They don't feel like it's even a useful thing to even bring up, is because they're when they crunch their numbers, crunch, and they see that, oh, hey, here's a large swath of voters who seem to be sort of apathetic towards anything climate change related. And we can relate this back to the story we were just talking about, as far as Medicare or the medical system overall. It's in those voters that, because they don't give a shit, that these candidates feel like they don't have to appeal to certain, what they would call fringe, factions within, within the Democratic Party, advocating for significant change when it comes to, the climate, and our sort of contributions to it. So until it actually becomes a big deal to voters overall, it's not going to show up on their radars. They're not going to talk about it if they don't have to. They only talk about something when they're forced to talk about it, right? And even then, their answers are shitty, and they just like, well, whatever. We're the only two candidates, so what the hell are you going to do? Who else are you going to vote for? Is essentially what their attitudes are. This. I don't want to necessarily bring this up because this is just rehashing things in the past, but we had a choice to make in the primary process when it came to Biden, at least on the Democratic side, and Bernie was right there, whether it was Bernie or Warren or whoever. We had other candidates to select from, but we ended up choosing Biden. And when he doesn't talk about climate change, when he doesn't talk about, Medicare for all, it should be no shocker to anybody. And this is what we've chosen, effectively. And people did that at the ballot, right? It's not some sort of mystery. People voted for him. And so this is what we get. And this is what it would appear that we're always going to get, so long as we keep making those type of choices.
Andrew, Tunde makes a good point. I mean, this is a failure of politics and policy, but this is a failure on behalf of the country as well. I mean, we live in a nation, God help us, Americans are not the brightest bulbs, right? I don't think that's a controversial statement. We can say present company not excluded from that, but as a whole, it's a bunch of dumb fucks in this country. I mean, just stupid, right? And in the face of what we have been witnessing, weather-wise, environmentally-wise, in the year 2020, like, we are already potentially at named storm R, right? I think they're looking at Tropical Depression Renee out there in the Atlantic somewhere. A record number of named storms in the Atlantic for the hurricane season this year. California is on fire. Washington, Oregon on fire. Denver and the Rocky Mountain areas just experienced the most wildest weather swing that they have ever had. The earliest frost ever in Denver happened the other day, when the previous day it was 90 degrees and then it snowed the very next day. I mean, we cannot be so ignorant as a whole, as a country, to not be able to connect these dots. And yet still, Americans as a whole do not seem to be connecting the dots. Therefore, the politicians are just like, oh, well, nobody seems to care. We're just not going to do anything. If I could just let the country drown and burn at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's part and parcel of why the politicians choose to do what they do, is because people aren't educated about this particular subject, and they don't see it as meaningfully, directly impacting their immediate lives. And so Americans react to things when there's a sense of immediacy with them. And that's part of the problem with the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, is that the Republicans are very good at coming up with ways to get their Republican base to think things are immediate problems that are not immediate problems, such as, the caravan that magically disappeared after the 2018 election on the Mexican-US border that was bringing in all these undocumented immigrants. That was an immediate problem, foreseeably in the eyes of many Republicans, but then it just went away after the election. And so the Republicans are very good at making immediate problems out of things that aren't actual problems and getting their base to vote in large numbers for them, as where the Democrats are terrible at looking at actual immediate problems that have long-standing consequences for humanity, civilization, and American society. And they just kind of breeze past those and talk about, some sort of like sense of normalcy that we're going to return to once we get rid of this like enigma, apparently, that is Trump, not recognizing the fact that Trump is part and parcel of a system that created what Trumpism is. You can draw a clear line, from the individualistic new conservative wave politics of the Reagan 80s directly to Trump. And you can draw a straight line from there and talk about all the different policies and, the Willie Horton ad that George H.W. Bush ran and how that influenced Trump's ideas about minorities in this country and how that's connected to that ethos and that broader political spirit of the right-wing movement of this country. So it's really problematic that the Democrats see an issue like climate change and don't actually see how it can politically benefit them when we're having climate upheaval across the United States right now. And meanwhile, the news media isn't mentioning anything about it.
And, I hope that we soon arrive at the place where politicians will stop saying we cannot afford the Green New Deal. No, bitch, we can't afford to not have the Green New Deal because your grandchildren are going to be swimming to school in the year 2060. So, actions need to be taken now, not later. Guys, we are running low on time. I know we did start a little bit late. I do want us to check out one more issue before we say goodbye. We haven't talked about police today, thankfully, and it's not that there's not stuff to talk about regarding the police. But the ACL, always. Oh my God. And shout out and solidarity to all the people in Rochester that have been taken to the streets following the release of the video of police allegedly asphyxiating a man. His last name was Prude. I can't remember his first name. My apologies to his family and our condolences to their families. Though people are still very much about it. When Kenosha, Wisconsin comes out in the streets, when Rochester, New York comes out in the streets, this is not just happening in big cities. This is everywhere. Policing is a problem everywhere. But we have been seeing here, at least on this show, the issues and tactics of police in Portland, and not just Trump's secret federal agents, the regular city police of Portland. We had a video on here, I believe it was Tuesday, where there was so much tear gas being deployed by Portland police. It was seeping into residents' homes where pregnant women were breathing in tear gas, children breathing in tear gas, people who had nothing to do with the demonstrations out in the streets still being gassed and in effect poisoned by the law enforcement agencies there. But let's pop up that tweet from the ACLU. They announced today that Portland has banned the use of tear gas, which if it sticks would be awesome because there's no guarantee that it's going to stick. Because other municipalities have tried to ban tear gas and the police were like, oh, we thought that was a suggestion. We didn't know that was like something that you actually for real wanted us to do. But as you see, breaking news out of Portland, Oregon, they just banned police from using tear gas on protesters. And I want us to play this video that the ACLU made back in June when it was clear that a lot of the demonstrations and the actions out in the streets nationwide were going to be sustained. And it was also pretty clear that police were content on gassing people nationwide. And that became pretty clear too. But you guys, tear gas is banned. It's not even allowed in war, according to the Geneva Conventions. Let's take a look at that video. I think it's pretty informative.
Tear gas is considered a chemical weapon. Yes, it's a chemical agent that is banned in warfare, but it has become the first resort weapon to disperse and suppress peaceful protesters with little regulation, accountability, and oversight. We've witnessed police using it excessively against protesters across the United States over the past week, including on journalists.
Police now advancing on protesters. Oh my gosh, we're moving. We're moving.
The most common symptoms of exposure can include excessive tearing and burning of the eyes, a running nose, burning mouth, chest tightness, coughing, skin burns, nausea, and vomiting. The use of tear gas and other crowd control weapons has been widely condemned as a human rights violations because they have been used indiscriminately, unnecessarily, and often without proper warning, and before other less harmful measures were taken. But make no mistake, tear gas and other less lethal weapons are dangerous and shouldn't be used to disperse protesters. Misuse or overuse has led to troubling levels of morbidity and even instances of death. After all, we're still fighting a pandemic, and the use of tear gas in this environment should concern us all. It's time to hold the police accountable for the use of tear gas, and for elected leaders to take steps to ban its use to disperse protesters.
So in this instance, when we're talking about a place like Portland, Oregon, that is governed by Democrats. The mayor of Portland is a Democrat, Ted Wheeler. We had Portland activist, Indigenous writer and activist on with us earlier this week, Sean Fleek, who gave Ted Wheeler the business and basically said that Ted Wheeler has authorized Portland police to gas protesters way before Portland became a national flashpoint. For the Black Lives Matter demonstrations happening there. Panel, I wanted to ask you, if the police say no, we're not going to stop using tear gas, then what? Tunde.
Yeah, you stunned us as if you hit us with tear gas with that question. I don't know what you do in that situation. Because I guess the only thing you can do is to continue doing what you're doing, right? Because I think one of the sort of revelations out of all of this that's happened, these past few months, is that people who were once really sort of like, I guess, apathetic towards, oh yeah, police, they're fine. They always help me out. A police officer helped me change a tire once, those people are actually, now that they're seeing it in their, in their nightly news, now that they're seeing reporters getting shot with tear gas. Well, now it's a problem for them too, right? And the white moderates, white suburbia, that always comes up in seemingly every story that we talk about in one fashion or another. They're becoming awakened to this sort of this police state that we're currently living in, and so the only thing that you can do is just to continue showing them examples of why the police and what kind of world do we live in when the bar is so low that it's just, hey, stop using tear gas. That's the bar. That's the thing that we're trying to get them to do. Kim, I don't know what you do in that case. The only thing that I can think of is just keep advocating, keep doing what you're doing because it's working. It's the face is being revealed. It's like when they take off the mask in Scooby-Doo, and you realize, oh man, that's what it was the whole time. And
it was police brutality the whole time.
And so as that continues to be revealed, and as their brutality continues to be revealed in real time, they can't help but change because at the end of the day they get their paychecks from tax dollars, right? And so if they want to continue doing so, which obviously we're talking about defunding police. We're talking about abolishing, the police. Those are the conversations that are happening. Well, then they're going to have to make some changes because the two aren't going to be able to coexist. The public and this crazy ass police state that we find ourselves in.
Hold on. Before you answer, Andrew, let me read a couple comments from the comments real quick because people are weighing in on this one. Kath JJ says, tear gas is a war crime. Somehow governments only use it on their own citizens. Yeah, funny how that works. Also from the comments, Malik 9.2 says, nothing is banned until someone goes to jail for ignoring the ban. And that is where I think we're going to see a little bit about who has the bigger cojones or who wields the bigger stick in this instance, Andrew, because and my apologies to the audience, because there was a municipality, it may have even been Portland, that did ban the use of tear gas, and police kept using it anyway. And I can't recall whether or not it was Milwaukee or where it was. And I will look that up for y'all and let you know. But Andrew, if the cops say no, who gonna check me, boo? Like who's going to step up and stop them and say that no? Well, the politician said that you're not allowed to do this, and they said, well, we don't give a fuck what the politicians say. This is crowd control. This is the way that we were trained. These are the techniques that we have authorized ourselves to use. Are you going to take the tear gas out our hands?
This is part and parcel a microcosm of the constitutional crisis that is going to be thrust upon the United States of America once this election in 2020, actually takes place foreseeably in November. I mean, you really need people to hold these institutions accountable. And when Democrats say, that, the military will just remove Trump when he loses this election, you have to have a more detailed plan than that. Just like when the Portland, government bans the use of tear gas, we can't just say, oh, well, now the cops can't do it, and now they're going to go listen to what the government said. No, there has to be a robust set of oversight put into place over top of these cops to ensure that that doesn't happen. There has to be another section of the government that entirely just polices the police until we can defund their ass, is basically what has to occur. So in order for that groundswell to be created, people have to remain active and remain on the streets and to demand the change that they see, that they need to see in their elected leaders, but also in the police. And just as a side note, real quick, as we wrap up, it's amazing to me the level of, American exceptionalist rhetoric that both the Democrats and Republicans, use when talking about some good actors within the police and the fact that we have only these bad apples. We have a system that perpetuates violence to the nth degree, and to say anything about that system other than to say that it's incredibly inherently violent is just historically inaccurate. I mean, we are the most violent country probably in the history of the world. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like, the fact that people get away with saying that we're exceptional in all these different ways when it comes to the police and the military, when we are responsible for more violence in the world than any other country at this given point in time, is just astonishing.
And it's so interesting, the way that violence is framed in this country, especially in the wake of what's been happening throughout the entire summer, where we see reports, especially the media is so guilty of this, where we see reports coming from these demonstrations where the media will be like, the protests turned violent. Well, they don't say it turned right. Yeah. But they don't say that the protests turned violent because police started beating the shit out of people, right? Like that's how it turned violent. The police turned it violent. The reason the people are even in the streets in the first place is because of unprovoked police violence. So yes, America has a ways to go, and I definitely think that, as Andrew said, we're about to see a clash of power as to who actually runs what. Do politicians run this country? Do people run this country? Or do the police run this country? And I think everyone needs to be laser focused on what happens in Portland in the next coming days, because it'll be interesting to see whether or not the police will adhere to this new directive. But gentlemen, that is our time, and that is our show. I'd like to thank Tunde Ogunfolaju from Why You Should Give a Fuck fame. And of course, they call him Mr. Thursday. He's representing Dirty Jers. Andrew Corkery, visuals and research producer here at The Real News. Guys, I love having you on. Thank you all both so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And listen up, gang. First of all, I'd like to remind you that we are in the middle of a fundraising drive. So we need some money. I'm talking about some Skrilla, some coins. We need all that. So go to therealnews.com/donate. Make a donation. If you like what you see here, if you like some of our other reporting, if you watch Rattling the Bars, if you watch Police Accountability Report, you got to show us some love. You know, you like us better than CNN, right? Okay, well, you pay money for cable for CNN. Drop us a couple of dollars while you at it. It don't have to be a lot, but we are trying to make our goal of $50,000. So don't forget, if you like the real news, support the real news. We really appreciate that. Folks, no show tomorrow. Dwayne said he not messing with us, so we're not going to have no show tomorrow. So we will see you next week on Tuesday for the newest editions of Stir Crazy. I'm your host, Kim Brown. Have a fantastic rest of your evening and have a good weekend. And don't forget, the Rona is out here still very much jumping on people. Wear your mask, wash your hands, social distance. Don't be out in people's faces. The Rona is killing people. I do not want it to kill you. So please be careful. All right, you guys, have a great rest of your day. See you later. Bye.